The Assassin's Creed series is undoubtedly one of the most important franchises in the history of the video games. The journey started in 2007 with the original idea of bringing a stealth-based open-world action-adventure game with a powerful narrative. Taking a quick look at where it all started and where it's at today. A lot of major changes can be seen, both upgrades and downgrades. The very first Assassin's Creed games were filled with the amazing storytelling, beautiful environments and legendary characters. But sadly, the franchise has been going further away from its glory with the latest Assassin's Creed titles. And it's kind of sad that we probably won't get another Ezio Auditore or another Edward Kenway. Ubisoft has decided to add more RPG elements to the series in more recent titles, and to be honest, it is all over the place. These new RPG elements have affected the flow of the story in a bad way, especially in Odyssey and Valhalla. Ubisoft has also been experimenting with the new combat mechanics, and let's be real, they're very confusing and disappointing. The hack and slash mechanics have taken away the original Assassin's Creed vibe, and I wonder why Ubisoft still calls it an Assassin's Creed. It's ironic how Ghost of Tsushima is more of an Assassin's Creed game than any of the recent titles. I've done a similar video where I explain why Ghost of Tsushima is an Assassin's Creed game we never got. Do check it out if you're interested. And in this video I'll be discussing why Ghost of Tsushima is better than the latest Assassin's Creed title, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Assassin's Creed Valhalla is Ubisoft's latest flagship title, the 12th major installment in the series, and the latest chapter in the Assassin's Creed timeline. The open-world action role-playing game brings a vivid Norse setting to the players along with a fictional story knitted around the Vikings. It is the most stunning Assassin's Creed up to date, with some of the major graphical upgrades, and all other aspects of the game are quite underwhelming. On the other hand, Ghost of Tsushima is a Sucker Punch's greatest creation yet. It falls along with the narrative based on samurai. When you play the game, it immediately hits you that this is basically an Assassin's Creed game, but only far better. Let's compare some of the gameplay elements to furthermore elaborate why Ghost of Tsushima is even better than the latest Assassin's Creed games. Assassin's Creed Valhalla is set in the United Kingdom and around other Scandinavian countries. And I should give Ubisoft credit where it's due. Valhalla is hands down the best looking Assassin's Creed games I've seen. It is also easily the most graphically stunning game made by the Ubisoft up to date. Comparing to the previous Assassin's Creed titles, Valhalla has a richer environment with a ton of more details, more vegetation, high resolution textures, and much more. The lighting is next remarkable thing. Clouds create dynamic sunlight, and it makes a daytime really gorgeous and immersive in a way. The game is really long, and I'll come back to it in a bit, but I found myself enjoying the aesthetics of the game for hours while on a horseback through the villages and forests, and other stunning emeralds of the northern lights during the night time. The setting and visuals are one whole other level. There are some flaws here and there, but the rest will surely cover up for it. But I have mixed feelings about the decision made by Ubisoft on the characters and the design. Don't get me wrong, they are really compelling and strong characters in the game, but we're all here for a protagonist, aren't we? Ubisoft has started being more political in latter of the Assassin's Creed titles by letting the players choose or decide on a female or a male protagonist. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but if Ubisoft has gone with a fixed character and a better build-up around them, we would have probably have gotten another Ezio. When playing Odyssey and Valhalla, it feels like the character is fitting to the story rather than the story fitting to the character, if that makes any sense. I'm not necessarily saying that Eivor is bad. As a matter of fact, I actually really liked Eivor, the male version though, because that's the one I played. He was much more enjoyable than Bayek, or even Cassandra or Alexios. Overall, they all don't seem like a legendary as Altair or maybe Edward or Ezio himself. Ghost of Tsushima, on the other hand, has a Japanese setting which the Assassin's Creed fans have been begging for since almost the beginning of the time. Like I mentioned before in my spoiler-free Ghost of Tsushima review, Ghost of Tsushima brings a more lively environment ever seen on any open world games. It's not just the calming sunsets, greener fields and blossoming forest that makes it beautiful, but how the entire world is in motion. The wind plays a major role in its beauty, as the wind kind of guides you to your destination. It feels like a whole environment is reacting to you. The fields you travel through flow in your direction, particles of the screen also flow with the wind, and it adds beauty into the game in its own way. The foxes and birds also respond to you more pleasingly, and you connect with the beauty of this game in a very special way. Also, in a contrast, Jin Sakai is a better character in almost every way, with a better build-up and a appreciable personality. Sucker Punch has focused on one character, and this kind of makes the story better and more immersive in a way. After all, both of the games are story-driven single-player titles, and I personally think that a stronger protagonist with more sense of drive is what makes the game closer to the players, and Sucker Punch nailed it in that department. I could say that I was much more attached to Jin Sakai than I ever was to Eivor. The real changes start popping out of the actual gameplay of the Valhalla. So, Ubisoft has done some major changes in the core gameplay of an Assassin's Creed games in the more recent titles. Now, the series went from being fun, stealth-based action game with a linear stories to semi-RPG style with a ton of decisions to make and story variations. It makes sense from the business perspective that Ubisoft wanted to slowly change the whole scope of the series to a more RPG-like experience. After all, they are competing with the other great open world titles such as The Witcher, Red Dead Redemption, and now of course Ghost of Tsushima. However, it is pretty obvious that the Assassin's Creed series was headed to a full RPG experience since Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, with the subtle elements such as recruit level up, ship upgrades, gear stats and skill trees. Now, it's kind of at the peak as the recent titled games. Odyssey and Valhalla have more decision making though as well, side quests and are full of the customizations options. To be honest, a lot of fans seem to have trouble wrapping their minds around Assassin's Creed being an RPG, and that is mainly because Odyssey and Valhalla's grind and confusing and disappointing epilogues, especially the grind in the Odyssey and Valhalla is simply insane. However, it is nice to see that Ubisoft has tried to make grinding a little special with the Valhalla, but it's also kind of a downside of the game. I already explained this on my Assassin's Creed Valhalla review a few days back, how each territory of the map needs to be befriended and how each of them has their own story arcs. Like I said, this is not a good feature nor bad for the game though. Now, it makes the grind more interesting because most of them have some good stories and cutscenes. However, the main downside of it is that it takes a lot of time to complete them all. I don't usually complain about the time I spend on the games, especially because I try to get a platinum trophies on almost every game. But the Alliance map in the Valhalla was really repetitive, unnecessarily long and sometimes disappointing too. And all the main side quests take a lot of time too, as you will need to explore and find them. Another new feature I have mixed feelings about is the ratings. Now, the first few times you're going to do it will be very fun and enjoyable, with you leading your own army sort of thing to a battle when fighting alongside them. It's a fresh feeling, but after a few raids they get really repetitive and you would just simply start freaking hating them. And as for the combat, it's the same old hack and slash playstyle, just like in Origins and Odyssey. The stealth mechanics of the series is almost long gone, and if Ubisoft decides to keep rid of the glorious stealth mechanics like back in the first titles, they really should call it the Warrior's Greed or something. You don't feel like an assassin at all in the more recent games, especially in Valhalla. It's quite disappointing to watch Ubisoft slowly just take away the best features of the series. All the mythical creatures and confusing superpower-like attacks aren't exactly needed to have a good game. Also, the dual-wielding feature was a great addition as well. It was innovative, but it's unnecessarily convoluted, especially since it was not thought out. For you to swing your weapon in a different hand, you need to hold the opposite button, while normal attacks require you to simply press them. It can be confusing at first, but over time you will get used to it. The issue is that there is no real reason for you to learn this or get familiar, since the best thing for you to do is simply use the heavy attack, most to all the times, since it's the best way to stagger enemies and deal more damage. Skill trees can look confusing, but in reality all you have to do is simply unlock them. There is no real progression in that, other than watching you highlight them, and yeah, sure, get some new additional features too, that you already have seen in the Odyssey and the Origins. But Ghost of Tsushima balances both with the gameplay and the combat to match perfectly in this comparison. Ghost of Tsushima is also an action game, and it certainly feels like one, with its vivid combat mechanics and other gameplay elements. The exploration was more interesting, with you unveiling the map as you progressed through it. The wind implementation was perfect, and side quests couldn't have been any better. Although there were a few downsides to the gameplay, like parkour, repetitive side quest objectives, and a few bugs and glitches. Ghost of Tsushima felt smoother and was unquestionably more enjoyable in every way. And the stances added more depth to the combat rather just giving us special abilities or skills. Combats were more challenging in a different way. While Valhalla requires you to keep spamming a button until an enemy health slowly runs low, Ghost of Tsushima basically makes the combat easier with the right stances. For example, you can simply execute hordes of enemies if you properly use utilities and stances, and that's just better combat experience than ever Valhalla is. It all comes down to the journey that game takes you through. Even if a game has amazing graphics and mechanics, it'll be soulless without a good narrative. Valhalla brings a pretty solid story of a young Viking Eivor, who leads his clan in some fierce battle against some British rulers and some other clans. Along his way he finds the Hidden Ones and joins them to fight against the Order of the Ancients. It's pretty solid until the territory story arc and the side quest starts. Most of them are fine, but some of them are very dramatic, and pacing really accelerates, making you question the outcome of your actions. This isn't a good thing at all. You might be fighting for something for hours and end up being disappointed by the outcome. In comparison, Ghost of Tsushima narrative is far more superior. Everything from the main quest to the side quest is extremely well designed, even though some of the side quests and playstyles tend to get a little bit repetitive. The samurai narrative is overall the better one out of these two games, not only because it's well knitted, but also because it depicts some historical accuracy, and Assassin's Creed series have been parting away in the recent titles. I will keep out all the spoilers and move on to the sound design of the two games. Hands down, both games have an amazing original soundtrack. I'm impressed with the Valhalla's original soundtrack, how it brings out the Viking vibe, making you see the environment the way it's meant to. The sounds are amazing and truly adds beauty to the game, especially under the Northern Lights. And on the other hand, Ghost of Tsushima music makes it feel like you're a living legendary samurai movie. Both of the games are amazing takes on two completely different timelines and settings. Both games have their own ups and downs. For example, Assassin's Creed is famous for having the best parkour in any game up to date. Well, not so much in the recent games though. And Ghost of Tsushima really doesn't have much parkour. The little climbing and parkour it has doesn't really look that good or polished. Even though Assassin's Creed has the best parkour, well, the older ones, there aren't any tall buildings and cities to run around like the good old days with the early Assassin's Creed titles. Especially Valhalla, it's filled with more of the mountains and natural structures more than the buildings. Even though Ghost of Tsushima doesn't have a good parkour, it really gives you some great climbing experiences, especially when completing objectives. Anyway, for me, Ghost of Tsushima stands out from the Assassin's Creed Valhalla due to the previously mentioned reasons, and I'm really glad that the mainstream media sees it as the gem it is. After all, Ghost of Tsushima went on to be nominated for a few Game Awards titles, including the Game of the Year 2020, Best Narrative, Best Sound Design, Best Game Direction, etc. It's simply the better game between these two games in many aspects, and I think it deserves to be the Game of the Year too. Check out my spoiler-free Ghost of Tsushima review and the Assassin's Creed Valhalla review for my initial thoughts about the two games, and also do check out my Ghost of Tsushima sequel video to find out the possibilities about the next Ghost of Tsushima title. Now, thank you so much for the continued support, Ravenstar, on my Patreon. Guys, please do consider supporting me as well to see these special videos earlier, including some of the extra rewards. At this, thank you so much for watching, like and subscribe, see you guys all later, have a wonderful day.